traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and the Songhees. Since I tabled our province's budget in February, our province, the world, and our lives have changed in ways that will shape generations. In February, I tabled a balanced budget with zero operating debt and ample prudence. We were preparing for an economic moderation. We were well equipped to be able to weather the challenges. What came next was unprecedented. Mere weeks after the budget 2020 was tabled, our entire world changed. From the beginning here in British Columbia, we followed the advice of Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister Adrian Dix. British Columbians made tremendous sacrifices to protect our loved ones and our communities by preventing the spread of COVID-19. Words like self-isolation, physical distancing, and flattening the curve became part of our daily conversations. People stayed home, businesses closed, and transitioned their operations, and again, physical distancing became an integral part of our day-to-day lives. Every day at 7 p.m., people took to their windows, to their yards, to their doors, to thank the frontline workers who kept our province going through the height of the crisis. People looked after one another, and our mantra became be kind, be calm, and be safe. Each and every day we've learned to navigate the health and economic crisis together. The impacts have been great. BC has lost over 235,000 jobs since February. Youth unemployment is at a staggering 29%, and women continue to be much more likely to have lost their jobs than a man. As I've said often, these aren't simply numbers. These are people. These are families. These are businesses and our communities. BC was fortunate to come into COVID-19 from a place of economic strength. We have a diverse, resilient economy, and we started 2020 with zero operating debt, AAA credit ratings, and one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Because of that strength, we were able to take immediate action to help people, to help businesses, to help communities with our $5 billion COVID action plan. I want to express my appreciation to all the MLAs in the legislature who came together very quickly to be able to give the kind of authority that was needed, the spending authority for the $5 billion. And I'm proud to say that BC's COVID action plan is one of the most comprehensive plans across this country to help people and to help businesses. We introduced a one-time tax-free $1,000 emergency benefit for workers. Over 600,000 people have received that support. We doubled the climate action tax credit, expanded it to provide support for over 80% of British Columbians. We introduced pandemic pay for approximately 250,000 frontline workers. We provided and then extended the $300 emergency support payment for those on income and disability assistance, including low-income seniors. We gave businesses a $700 million property tax cut. We protected people and businesses from evictions while deferring several taxes, giving people much-needed breathing room. And we're going to continue to provide the supports that people and businesses need as the pandemic and the economic downturn evolve. And as the fall approaches, there are in fact more benefits for families and students on the way, including the Child Opportunity Benefit, which provides families who have one child up to $1,600, two children up to $2,600, and those with three children up to $3,400 a year. More than 40,000 post-secondary students will receive immediate help with the cost of their education with the new BC Access Grant, which provides up to $4,000 for the students for their studies. Those benefits were budgeted well ahead of the crisis, and they're going to give families and young people a much-needed helping hand in the months and years ahead. In fact, the investments that we've made in our previous three budgets, including childcare, Clean BC, and housing, provide British Columbians with a strong foundation for recovery. And we'll continue to chart a path through these unprecedented times, and of course, always rely on the advice of Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister Adrian Dix. So in a moment, I'm going to take you through what we think is BC's most likely economic scenario based on the information we have today. The projected numbers are staggering, but they're not without hope. Things are getting better each and every day when we follow the provincial health officer's advice. And today's fiscal update, though certainly far from Budget 2020 and the surplus that we tabled before the pandemic, provides us an opportunity to build a stronger BC that works for everyone in our province. So I'll move to our first slide. So I want to begin with just a very brief timeline of recent events. As you can see from the slide, the first COVID case in our province was less than 6 months ago, and so much has happened since then. We've seen the rate of transmission decline and we flatten the curve. But we also know that pandemics can come in waves. And so we're moving ahead with our restart plan with caution and very careful planning. Next slide. The public health measures taken in BC have limited the spread of the virus thanks to all British Columbians who've done their part to be able to keep the transmission of this disease down. To date, BC's number of confirmed cases per 1 million has been below the rest of Canada and most other countries. However, and you'll hear this reminder constantly, we must continue to follow Dr. Henry's advice, as an uptick is always possible. And we know that a strong public health response is, in fact, a strong economic recovery response. We flatten the curve because people came together, and it's going to take that same kind of discipline, that same kind of hard work, and that same kind of caring for each other to be able to help us through the economic recovery. Next slide. The economic impacts to date have been severe, and that's certainly demonstrated by the widespread job losses and the impact to businesses. So before I get into the specific economic scenario, I want to take a moment to go through some of the indicators that we've been tracking and use to be able to build the economic scenario. Just a reminder that there are lags in the data that we receive. For example, the retail sales data became available in June. That's for April. We got the employment data, of course, for June, just released on Friday. So that's part of the reason that you've seen that we took some time to be able to make sure that the data we were getting really related to the biggest difficulties that we were facing during COVID. So on this slide, you can see we'll begin with the labor stats. And as I mentioned, 235,100 fewer jobs in BC in June compared to February. And while the job losses in March and April were record-breaking, the figures for May and June, in fact, have seen some recovery of the losses that we experienced in the previous 2 months as the economy has started to reopen. The unemployment rate in British Columbia decreased to 13% in June from 13.4% in May, as more people started to work again and as restrictions start to ease. However, we have to remember that the recent unemployment is at the highest rate we've seen in our province since 1987. Next slide. The job losses have also been widespread, not simply in one sector. There is no question that COVID-19 impacts British Columbians unequally. It discriminates based on age, based on gender, based on income level, and based on the sector that you work in. The employment declines since February have been concentrated in the wholesale and retail trade sector, accommodation and food services, as you can see from the slide, culture and recreation, and the construction sector. Hardest hit, youth and young adults. And this is in large part due to the fact that they're overrepresented, of course, in restaurant and retail services. Employment among persons aged 15 to 24 declined by 70,100 jobs from February to June. The unemployment rate for that age category rose sharply from 9.1% in February to 29.1% in June. That's an increase of 20 percentage points. Women are another group that are more affected by COVID-19. This is again because they tend to be overrepresented in the service sectors that have been hard hit by the pandemic. Employment among women in BC declined 120,000 jobs from February to June, and the female unemployment rate rose from 4.8% in February to 13.4% in June, an increase of 8.6 percentage points. And of course, it's important to remember that often women have to leave the workforce to provide care for children or people who are sick and sick relatives. Next slide. Let's take a look on this slide at the retail data, sales data. And again, a reminder that April is the most recent, so we still expect we'll see some real drops and some real challenges through the month of May as well before we started getting into the restart. No question, consumer spending pulled back during the month of April, and that, of course, was due to job losses, reduced mobility, physical restrictions that were in place. BC's nominal retail sales declined by 20.7% in April compared to March. That's the largest monthly decline on record. This followed a 3.7% monthly decline in March. So overall, BC's retail sales were 23.6% lower in April compared to February 2020. And where have we seen those shifts? Well, declines in retailers have been broad-based, but certainly in non-essential items, clothing accessories, hobbies, books, music, and big-ticket items, furniture, home furnishings, motor vehicles. We have seen the sale of some items, food and beverages, has been significantly higher, but certainly the drops have been very significant. Next slide. Housing market activity, as you can see from this slide, is certainly mixed. We see home building continuing to be resilient. We've seen housing starts average 35,794 annualized units since February, but we've seen a huge decline, very steep decline when it comes to home sales, down 45.4% in May compared to February. And while home sales rose 33.7% month over month in May, following a record-breaking decline, they still remain at 12-year lows. In June, we're starting to see some movement and we're starting to see some positive signals, but again, lots of volatility in the housing market. And the average home sale price in BC went down 4% in May compared to February, and that's the provincial average. Next slide. So this slide is interesting because I think it really points out the volatility that we're seeing in the nature of the pandemic on our economy. This slide looks at the private forecasters' numbers, and they've been changing their projections, understandably, given the kinds of information that we are gathering and others are gathering. COVID-19 impact is really being felt across the world, and consensus projections for global economies have been revised down significantly, as you can see on this slide on the right-hand side. June projections call for real GDP growth forecasts of negative 6.6% for Canada, negative 5.6% for US, growth up in China but only by 1.4%, negative 5.3% for Japan, and negative 8.4% for the Eurozone. And of course, BC, being a small open economy, is impacted by anything that happens globally. So related to this global activity that you're seeing and the drops in growth, BC's international merchandise exports have continued to decline this year. And that again is due to global pricing, global demand, commodity prices. Exports are down 1.6% in May compared to February, and down 14.7% year to date when comparing the January to May period of 2019. BC's exports to our three major trading partners, US, China, and Japan, are all down on a year-to-year basis. We're seeing year-to-date declines in all the key commodity markets you would imagine: softwood lumber, pulp and paper, metallic mineral, natural gas, and coal. So turning back now to the projections, significant impacts are expected all across the provinces, as you can see from the chart. Private sector forecasters expect BC's real GDP to decline by 5.4% in 2020, as shown on the left-hand side chart. The expected decline is 6.6% on average across Canada, and BC ranks fourth among the provinces. So the 6 private sector forecasters for BC range between negative 4.2% and negative 6.1% in 2020. And in fact, some organizations are forecasting even steeper economic declines. Central One Credit Union, for example, is suggesting negative 6.8%. The BC Business Council is suggesting negative 7.8%. So again, this really just highlights the kind of uncertainty in forecasting that we're seeing right now. Before we bring forward our Q1, of course, we will be surveying the 13-member Economic Forecast Council before we release Q1. Next slide. So I can't emphasize enough the challenges in preparing any kind of scenario right now. To present a possible outcome when you see the kind of volatility, it creates some real challenges. So that's why we've developed a scenario rather than a typical forecast, because of the unprecedented nature of COVID-19 and the uncertainty regarding the magnitude of the economic decline caused by the pandemic and the path of recovery, and what kind of path the recovery takes as well. So this chart that you're seeing speaks to the various elements of uncertainty that will influence the depth and the duration of the economic slowdown. And that includes everything from future outbreaks here in British Columbia, but obviously in other places as well, because that impacts us here as a province. The evolution of public health policies, medical technologies, vaccines, the response of the general public, impacts on consumer spending and confidence, the response of business when it comes to investment decisions, again, impact on confidence, supply chains, and business model adaptations. It's also going to depend on the success of relief measures and supports as those change over the next number of months as well. Corporate cash flow could shift, personal incomes could shift, and of course, policies of the central bank, liquidity in the system, and laying the foundation for recovery via low interest rates. Next slide. So the economic scenario was developed by analyzing employment by industry data and developing assumptions around the timing and the extent of business recovery and the eventual rehiring of employees. So this scenario underlying it is an assumption that the pace of hiring will continue to be cautious, that we'll continue our measured approach when it comes to recovery. It assumes as well that physical distancing remains in place, that global travel remains somewhat restricted, and that businesses in the tourism and retail and recreation sectors are expected to continue to be impacted for some time. The pace of economic recovery in this scenario is also guided by consumer and business behavior. So in this scenario, BC's economy could decline by 6.8% in 2020. As the economy recovers and hiring and spending improves, the economy could grow back by 3.1% by 2021. So just for a moment to put that in context, BC's real GDP fell by 2.4% in 2009 and 6.4% in 1982. Those are the only annual declines in BC real GDP and recent records going back to the 80s. So as those numbers really remind us, this could be the worst downturn experienced in our province in recent history. We built this scenario with prudence, as we do in each of our budgets, compared to the most recent average projection of the 6 private sector forecasters, which calls for a decline of 5.4% in 2020, followed by a rebound of 5.4% in 2021. We also know that many businesses are expected to experience a loss of revenue due to closures and restrictions introduced in BC and internationally. As such, BC's corporate profits are expected to decline in 2020 before recovering in 2021. And as I mentioned, physical distancing and global travel restrictions are expected to be in place for some time. Because of that, we expect the job losses that have occurred in British Columbia are not expected to be fully recovered this year. So the scenario is built with employment in the province declining by 9.8% in 2020, which corresponds to an annual loss of 252,000 jobs, and as businesses resume operations and employees are rehired, employment in British Columbia could increase by 4.4% in 2021, representing an annual gain of 102,000 jobs. Consumer spending, of course, has been impacted by job losses, lower income, and the temporary closure of some retail stores. As such, retail sales in British Columbia are estimated to decline in 2020 and pick up in 2021, again, when employment and income prospects improve. The housing market is expected to be impacted again by unemployment, by lower income, weaker migration. The value of residential sales may decline by 27.6% in 2020, followed by possible growth of 9.3% in 2021. And again, we built in prudence in our scenario for housing. Next slide. This slide is just a reminder of where we were at. As I mentioned, we have a strong fiscal foundation. Certainly before the crisis, as you know, surpluses across the 3 years of the fiscal plan, best debt metrics and credit rating compared to other provinces in Canada. And I put this here because I think it's important to recognize that that strong fiscal foundation will help us as we move into recovery. It gives us a good foundation to be able to build from. Next slide. So the economic scenario results in revenue losses totaling $6.3 billion in 2021 compared to the Budget 2020 forecast. Taxation revenues down $4.2 billion. Natural resource revenues $300 million lower. Net revenue from Crown corporations and agencies down about $1.8 billion. So I'll walk through some of the specifics for you. A personal income tax revenue down almost $1 billion from lower personal income and wages and salaries. 2020 household income falls 3.9% compared to the budget assumption of a gain of 3.8%. Corporate income tax revenue down $973 million, again due to lower corporate profits nationally in 2020. Employers' health tax revenue $238 million lower than budget because of employment losses and reduced payrolls. Refundable tax credits are $141 million lower, mainly from reduced film and production service activity. Provincial sales tax revenue down $1.3 billion, reduced consumer and business purchases, of course, of taxable items. The lower housing market results in $465 million in reduced property and property transfer tax revenues. And residential sales declines 27.6% in 2020 compared to a 4.6% increase assumed in the budget. Fuel and carbon tax revenues down $353 million, reflecting reduced demand for gasoline, natural gas, and diesel. Natural resource revenues, $300 million drop, and as I mentioned, in almost every commodity price area. Commercial Crown Corporation net income, $882 million lower in budget. And almost all of this is due to the reduced casino activity, BC Lottery Corporation casino activity, and the impact, of course, will depend on any timing of reopening. The impact on the liquor distribution branch is relatively low, $37 million, because liquor sales haven't been impacted in liquor stores, but there's still a decline, of course, from restaurants and other establishments. This fiscal scenario doesn't include changes in the outlook for ICBC finances at this time compared to the budget. Because it's too early, you're seeing, of course, fewer accidents early in the year because of lower transportation activity, but that could be offset as the year goes on and as more transportation and more vehicles return to the road. There's also uncertainty, of course, around investment markets, so you'll see some additional pieces added in Q1. And the scenario also doesn't change anything on the BC Hydro results to date. Again, the corporation is working to address the impacts of COVID-19 and the relief measures that are in place, and that will be reported in their fiscal statements. Compared to budget, taxpayer-supported agency losses, $869 million. That's mainly lower international tuition fees and other revenue from post-secondary and K-12 schools. So now I'll go through some of the government's measures in the next slide. It's the next slide. As you know, COVID-19 is a global crisis that really needed a coordinated response from all levels of government. And in BC, we really focused our response. We wanted to complement federal measures and also meet the needs, specific needs, for British Columbians. So on March 23rd, the legislature approved supplementary estimates, which provided an additional $5 billion in spending for our COVID-19 action plan. And this includes the notional allocations of $3.5 billion for critical services and $1.5 billion to support economic recovery. In addition to these spending measures, we looked all across government at every financial lever that we had at our relief to be able to provide relief. And that included tax credits, that included reductions, that included payment deferral measures, and I'll talk a little bit more about those specifics in the next slides as well. So critical services, starting with critical services. $1 billion to support healthcare response measures, and these again are from the $5 billion. That includes everything from community and long-term care responses, lab testing, contact tracing, staffing costs, and preparing for the crisis. It also included additional mental health supports, such as our expanded virtual mental health supports, access to counseling services, and very targeted supports. Over $250 million went to ensure that childcare spaces remained available to essential service workers and to provide relief and preserve spaces for parents during any temporary closures. Nearly $90 million for housing and homeless supports, again to provide critical services and help meet the health and safety needs that were there. And this is in addition to the hotels that have been purchased to help people move from encampments. The province also provided additional funding to maintain services for vulnerable populations, including services to adults with diverse abilities and to support youth and children receiving provincial supports. Next slide. So now looking at financial supports. Again, I mentioned the $1 billion for the BC Emergency Benefit for workers. We also allocated $350 million to provide a $300 per month crisis supplement for those on income and disability assistance, and that also included a boost for the senior supplement for those low-income seniors through to the end of August. We provided relief to renters. We're providing a temporary rent supplement to support tenants whose income has been impacted by COVID-19. This benefit provides up to $300 for individuals and $500 for couples. We also partnered with the federal government on several relief measures. Pandemic pay, for example, will benefit over 250,000 frontline workers in health and social services with a one-time temporary wage boost. The Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program helps provide rent relief to businesses by providing forgivable loans to cover 50% of the rent payments for eligible tenants. And in addition to the broad-based financial supports for individuals and businesses, there's been approximately $40 million allocated for targeted emergency relief to support businesses and not-for-profit organizations. That includes everything from support to the agricultural sector and BC farmers to maintain safe food supplies, emergency animal care funding, and emergency funding for the hard-hit tourism sector, including support for parks operators to be able to safely reopen, and tourism organizations to support the recovery effort. Next slide. And then, of course, there's the $1.5 billion for economic recovery. As I mentioned, our health response, our COVID action plan, and our Safe Restart plan have really provided the foundation for economic recovery. We all know that businesses can only operate successfully if we work to flatten the curve. People can only spend funds at BC businesses if they have a stable income and feel confident that they can get out again. In addition to the foundation that we built, as I mentioned, we have $1.5 billion set aside. And we put a number of processes in place to be able to gather information from the sectors and from the public. The Premier has an economic recovery task force which brings together leaders from business, labour, First Nations and not-for-profits to make sure that the province's economic response to COVID is effective and responds to the needs of British Columbians. The task force continues to meet on a regular basis. In June, as you know, we also launched a public consultation process to gather feedback from British Columbians. There's another week of that survey open, so hopefully people will make sure that they're providing their input. It's been really quite extraordinary and rewarding to see the number of people who've been taking part. And then in addition, for the last number of months, the Premier, myself, ministers and MLAs have been holding town halls, have been holding roundtables, sector-specific discussions, again to make sure that our recovery plan is flexible and responsive and meets the needs of people, businesses and community organizations. We look forward to sharing the recovery plan framework in September. Next slide. So I want to touch for a moment just on the relief measures that are outside the $5 billion. This includes, and again, as I mentioned, we looked at every tool we have across government available to us to provide that support. So this includes an increase to the Climate Action Tax Credit in July, that's $500 million. A reduction in the school tax rates for commercial properties by an average of 25%, $700 million. Delays in increasing the scheduled carbon tax and other budget 2020 measures, $200 million. And we also implemented tax and payment deferral measures. That included a 6-month pause on student loans, hydro bill relief and deferral measures, and a number of other tax and payment deferrals to provide cash flow to businesses and municipalities. Now, those tax and deferral measures don't have a direct impact on the budget in 2020 because, of course, they're expected to be paid back, but they did provide much-needed cash flow and are providing much-needed cash flow to businesses. There are some indirect costs, of course, related to deferrals. That includes increased interest on the deferred payments and any potential default that could happen. Those, again, as the payments are received, they will be built in and incorporated into quarterly forecasts, as well as any costs. Next slide. So just in summary, the BC Action Plan and the additional current measures total $6.2 billion for this fiscal year compared to Budget 2020. That includes, of course, the $5 billion in supplementary spending, and the $1.3 billion that I just ran through for tax credits and other tax and relief payments. And then, while not directly impacting the fiscal plan, the government has implemented an additional $6.3 billion in deferral measures. Again, those dollars expected to come back. What about the current budget? You may have questions around what impacts have happened so far in the current budget. The ministry budgets remain as we presented them in February, including the existing contingency vote, vote 45. That $600 million, just to remind you, that was built in as contingencies, we expect will be fully needed to be able to cover program caseload needs, other pandemic response needs that may come up, and other programs that may face pressure because of COVID. To date, as you know, there's been minimal wildfires. Right now, the estimated costs are at $50 million, which falls well within the budget that is put aside. Under the Emergency Program Act, we do expect that statutory spending will be above the voted allocation, and that's to, of course, manage any kind of emergency costs within the scope of the Act. So this includes $17.5 million for freshet related flooding costs that we're seeing, emergency management costs, which includes everything from emergency operation centers to coordination. The issue of travelers coming in would be included there. So again, we expect that there'll be additional resources needed in that area. And then statutory spending of $76 million above the base budget is anticipated to cover those costs. Next slide. So just touch a little bit on the capital investments and the debt impacts. We're projecting $22.9 billion in taxpayer-supported capital spending across the province in the next 3 years in our 3-year fiscal plan. And this, of course, was built in our February budget. And this is going to serve us very well because it really translates into huge investments in schools, in roads, in transit, in bridges, hospitals, housing, services that people count on, and services that we need to build a strong economy. So the capital projects are going to continue to proceed, and of course we'll be looking at whether there are projects that can move ahead that are ready. We do have some, as you can see from the slide, approved projects that are proceeding with procurement, everything from the Patello Bridge to St. Paul's Hospital, Broadway Subway Line, Burnaby Hospital, Highway 1, 4-laning, Stewart Hospital, Stewart Lake Hospital in Fort St. James, Caribou Memorial in Williams Lake, and of course the replacement of Mills Memorial in Terrace. There are other projects that are of course moving ahead with the business plan development, and those include the Richmond Hospital, the Cowichan Hospital, and a new Surrey Hospital in Cloverdale. So again, the fact that we had historic levels of capital built into our budget will do us very well as we look at the economic recovery ahead. Next slide. So that means increased borrowing. Of course, when we're taking a look at a deficit under the fiscal scenario, taxpayer-supported debt level, which excludes the commercial crown debt, is expected to increase to $61.9 billion at the end of 2021. The projection in Budget 2020 was $49.2 billion by the end of 2021. So flowing from the change to debt level, the taxpayer-supported debt to GDP increases to 22% in 2021. This increase from 15.5% that was forecast in 2020, again, is due to higher debt levels and also due to a lower GDP assumed under the scenario. We've been very fortunate. We've had in BC one of the best debt metrics and credit ratings compared to other provinces in Canada, which again puts us in a very good position to be able to deal with the recovery. Next slide. So again, although we're faced with increased borrowing and higher debt levels, we're also operating, as you know, in a time of very low interest rates. So from an operating perspective, we're very well positioned in British Columbia to be able to afford the annual interest costs. And as you can see here on this slide, whether you look at interest as a percentage of revenue or you look at it as a percentage of GDP, the levels are lower than they have been historically. Next slide. So again, just to emphasize, I think I can't emphasize this enough, this scenario is based on a snapshot in time. There are a number of risks that will impact our fiscal plan. Slower recovery, weaker global recovery, a negative shock that could occur, Crown corporations and their positions, a need for further government measures, wildfires and floods. I think it's important to note all of those could have an impact on the bottom line. And again, just to summarize, total changes since Budget 2020 amount to $12.7 billion. Government support for people and businesses stands at $6.262 billion, which of course includes the $5 billion in supplementary estimates, and then the additional pieces, as I talked about, the Climate Action Tax Credit and the other relief measures that we put in place. Overall revenue is expected to drop by $6.313 billion, and debt servicing costs, $176 million. Budget 2020, of course, forecast an operating surplus of $227 million. So after all of those changes, you get an operating deficit estimated at $12.5 billion for 2021. Next slide. So here you can just see the outline of our economic response, the pieces that are in place already, public accounts still to come, first quarterly to come, the economic recovery framework launch, and then of course future budgets. So I think it's just important to outline where the fiscal picture, where we'll give you updates as we go along. So there is no question that COVID-19 has changed the way we live day to day. But it hasn't changed the priorities of our government. We're going to continue to invest in people, in the services that people rely on, and in a long-term strong economic position with jobs in every corner of our province. The pandemic has certainly exposed underlying gaps in our economy and our society. It's also highlighted areas of critical importance. Our recovery plan is going to be focused on our values we have as British Columbians. Taking action on climate change, addressing the rights of Indigenous people, building back government revenue, addressing inequality, and building a strong, resilient, innovative economy that leaves no one behind. These values are critical to people in British Columbia, and they're critical to us as a government. There's no question that there are big challenges ahead, But together we flatten the curve in British Columbia. And together we're going to get through economic recovery. Thanks so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Minister. As a reminder to everybody on the phone, please press star 1 to enter the queue. You are limited to one question and one follow-up only. Please take your phones off mute. You will not be audible until I call your name. First question is from Rob Shaw, Vancouver Sun.
Oh, hi, Minister. Just wondering if you could tell us to what extent a deficit this large is going to impact on any type of cutbacks or curtailments or delaying of any plans that you otherwise would have had for this year to try and make up the losses. I hear you saying that you're going to sort of continue on, but are you doing anything behind the scenes to try and cut back on government spending to address this number?
Well, I think the first piece to say is that now is not the time to be able to cut back on services and supports for people and for businesses in British Columbia. In fact, as we know from the COVID supports that we put in place, these supports are critical to building back our economy. If you're looking at over 600,000 people who've already received the emergency benefit, that really shows that the need is great, and we've seen the federal government as well extending their programs. So we are not looking, because it wouldn't be good for economic recovery right now, to pull back on spending and cause some more challenges in our economy. But that doesn't mean that we aren't looking at our spending. We'll be going into the budget process in the fall. We will be, of course, looking to make sure that every cent we spend is spent wisely. It's spent on the priorities that we've had as government that are British Columbia's priorities. So we will be reviewing everything as we go into the budget process. But as I said, this is not the time to be pulling back and to be cutting programs and services that are critical for economic recovery for people and businesses.
Do you have a follow-up, Rob?
Sure. Yeah, there are a number of businesses that are hoping at some point you're going to say that the delayed collection of taxes, the employer health tax, PST, carbon tax, the government is basically not going to want that money back, rather than forcing businesses to have to come up and pay for it later this fall. Is there any scenario in which you do that and this $12 billion deficit becomes 14 or 16 billion? And would that matter to the provincial books if it helped businesses from having to pay bills that they don't think they're going to be able to pay later this year?
Well, as I've said, we've built our COVID plan, and in fact, I'm really proud of the fact that we have one of the most comprehensive plans across the country. Other provinces have not put supports in place for for their provinces most vulnerable. We put in place rent supports as well. So we have a comprehensive plan, and it's important to recognize that if more is needed, we will do more. So we will be reviewing all of those measures well before the fall. We'll be taking a look at what's needed for economic recovery, and if more is needed, then we will be providing more. It's important for families, for communities, for businesses to know the government has their back through this process, and that we're looking ahead to how we can build a strong economy for everyone, and that's going to require supports to be in place. So yes, we'll be reviewing all of those pieces as well.
Next question is from Richard Zisman, Global News.
Minister James, I know you don't have a crystal ball, you've said that before, but what are you looking at in terms of long-term impacts? Is it possible to forecast beyond the 3 years around how long we may be in these deficit situations due to the pandemic?
Well, I think as you've seen, Richard, from the numbers today and from the volatility from private sector economic forecasters, it's tough to forecast this year, never mind to forecast 3 years or 10 years out. I think there is no question that COVID-19 has had a profound impact on the economy in British Columbia, and that that's not short term, that that's going to have some time to be able to be addressed. As you know, we've tabled legislation that will allow for a budget for 3 years with a review each year, of course, by government. And I think that's the prudent thing to do, but I don't think anyone at this stage could look ahead and say how long the recovery is going to take and when we'll see shifts, because this isn't simply a British Columbia issue. This is, in fact, a global issue.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
I do. As you know, Minister, people look at $12.5 billion and they don't know what that means. This pandemic, I don't have to tell you, has profoundly impacted every British Columbian. What will this mean in terms of looking at these numbers? What should people take from it? You mentioned to Rob's question, no service cuts, but could there be tax increases? Could there be additional pressures put on British Columbians to help sort out the financial picture?
Well, I think my message to British Columbians is that while this is going to be challenging, there's no question about it. I think I can't say that enough, that we can address this together. And that means government being there for businesses and being there for people. We're going to provide the supports that are needed to build a strong economy. The public is doing their part. They sacrificed to be able to make sure that we could bend the curve. They've sacrificed to start the restart in a slow, measured approach to make sure we're doing this well. So British Columbians are doing their part. Businesses are doing their part. Government's doing its part by being there for people and for businesses. That's what's going to be needed over this next year in particular as we start to see more of a runway to what the recovery could look like.
Next question is from Binder Sudjan, CTV. Binder? Okay, we'll move on to Lisa Eusden, News 1130.
Minister, sort of following up on what Richard just asked, for people who are sitting at home just trying to make, their lives go through this pandemic, what does this mean to their bottom line, to their ability to buy groceries, pay insurance, pay rent, send their kids to daycare, whether they have jobs or not? How does this massive deficit affect them?
This plan and the statement that we put out today, the scenario that we put out today, shows and will reassure people in British Columbia that government is there for them. I think there are people who I've talked to who have been very worried that they're going to start seeing cuts in programs and services, that it's going to be more difficult to be able to get through the recovery. And so I think what you're seeing here in this plan and in the scenario that we brought forward is we are, as government, going to continue to provide the supports that are needed. We recognize that these are challenging times. We recognize that now is not the time to be looking at cutting programs and services. Now is not the time to be making life more difficult for families. You've seen in our previous budgets the investments we made to make life more affordable, to improve services. We're going to continue on with that focus to build a sustainable economy that recognizes climate action, that recognizes reconciliation, that addresses the fact that there were people left behind in the previous economy. We are going to make sure that those continue to be front and center through this process, because that people are our economy. And if we're going to build a strong economy, we have to support the people of this province, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
I do. So when you're saying that programs and services aren't going to be cut, I'm sure that's a relief to many people. But for those who have had their rent deferred, who have had some fees, taxes, those kinds of things deferred, this is sort of following up on what Rob asked, is there a chance that those payments could be wiped out, written off? Because people are quite rightly freaking out and having heart attacks about how they're going to, continue to live and then pay back these amounts that have been deferred.
As I mentioned, we're going to continue to assess the programs that are in place. We've extended a number of programs already through until September 1st. We've got to watch the restart process and see how the restart process is going. I think we saw a bright light when it came to the job numbers and the fact that 40% of the jobs in British Columbia that we'd lost from February had come back. That's a good sign because, of course, people want to get back to work. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want to be able to support their families. So I think all of those are positive signs. Our economic recovery plan will again focus on people getting back to work and being able to provide those supports to them. So we'll be reviewing all of those as we go along.
Mary Griffin, Check News.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much, Minister, for taking my question. I'm just wondering, Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau has said that he's not contemplating any tax increases at this time. I didn't hear in your response to Richard the question about tax increases in BC. And I also don't see anything about support for the tourism industry in BC, and I'm thinking of the island as well here. Other provinces have received help from the federal government, and where is BC on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And I'll touch on the tourism piece first because, in fact, we have put supports in place for the regional tourism organizations for their campaign around people vacationing locally and doing it in a safe way. And certainly from the people I talk to in my community, people are already booked into venues right here in the province and are excited about seeing British Columbia. And then again, we know that there'll be tourism work going on through the recovery work that's happening as well. And no, we don't anticipate increase in taxes at this point.
Do you have a follow-up, Mary?
Well, I just on the tourism front, I know in speaking with people in the industry, the advertising campaign they've said bluntly it just doesn't cut it. Is there any consideration to assisting the industry any other way?
That's why the minister is working very closely, and the premier and myself as well. I held a sector table with tourism. I know she's in close conversations about what supports can be in place as we get into the recovery dollars that will come out in the fall. So yes, those conversations are happening now.
Next question is from Vaughn Palmer, Vancouver Sun.
Good day, Minister. Would you agree that this level of deficit and debt is not sustainable in the long run, and that at some point the province will have to have a plan to bring the books back into balance and start paying it off? And what conditions do you think would allow the provincial government to start doing that?
Well, I think the first thing to mention, Vaughn, is that, of course, we're in unprecedented times. I talked about the challenges that we've had. I talked about the loss in revenue. I've talked about the impact on people and businesses. No one has a playbook for dealing with this. This is not unique to British Columbia. This is a Canadian, a global, a world challenge that is going to have to be addressed worldwide. I do not believe that it's going to be a quick fix. I certainly, as you know from the previous budgets that I brought in, I believe that you manage within your means, that you provide that support, and I brought in those balanced budgets. But in these kinds of times, looking at balance over providing support for people and businesses when we're in the middle of a pandemic, not knowing what can come, not knowing whether the second wave is coming, would be frankly irresponsible. To focus on that area rather than the people and businesses and economic recovery that needs to happen. So I can't give you a playbook of when that's going to occur. I think there are a number of steps that need to happen, though. One is to spend the money wisely. To make sure that every dollar is being spent wisely, that it's focused on economic recovery and supporting the people who grow our economy, the individuals, the workers across this province, the families across this province, supporting businesses to be able to invest again, growing the economy, which is part of the focus we're taking around the economic recovery plan. So all of those can make a difference. We can start addressing some of the deficit by looking at how we grow government revenue, how we support further investment in our province, and we'll be looking at all those pieces as part of economic recovery.
Do you have a follow-up, Vaughn?
Yes, please. Minister, when you were asked in the House on March 23rd, when you got the supplementary estimate through for $5 billion, you were asked at the time, is this enough? And you said you believe it's enough for now. Is that still your view on the $5 billion, and that's enough now, or did I hear you suggest that in the fall or later it may be necessary to go back to the House for additional funding for program support and economic recovery?
Well, I think, as I said at the time, and I still believe the $5 billion is enough now. We have been managing within that $5 billion, but I think it's also important, as I went through the presentation, to recognize that we have also used other tools that we have in government to be able to add additional dollars to that $5 billion. So that includes the tax measures that we put in place. Those we have the spending authority and the ability to make those changes, and those are pieces we can continue to do outside of the $5 billion. If there are other changes that are needed as we get into the fall, again, I can't predict where we're going to be headed, but we still have the ability to look at those tax measures and those tax tools, and we have an ability, if we need to be able to address spending in other areas where we have the authority. So I think for now, we're living within what the dollars that are here. We're providing additional resources outside of the $5 billion, but what could happen in the fall, a second wave, other things that could occur, I don't think anyone can predict right now.
Lisa Cordasco, CHLY.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Minister, what signals do you believe government needs to send to bolster business and or consumer confidence?
Well, I think the first and very most important piece is a strong healthcare plan. because if we don't make sure that people feel comfortable getting back out again in their communities, if businesses are not feeling safe to open, if the public doesn't feel safe to go into businesses, if we don't build that confidence, we won't have an economic recovery plan. So first and foremost is following the directions of Dr. Bonnie Henry, Minister Adrian Dix, making sure physical distancing, that we don't forget that those pieces still have to be in place. Washing our hands, wearing a mask when you can't physical distance. Those pieces are going to continue to be critical, and I believe are the most important piece for us as we look at economic recovery, because that builds confidence. It builds confidence from the inside of our province as well as the outside, and builds confidence for businesses to be able to invest and start getting economic activity going again. Positive signs in the job numbers that we saw, but again, we'll want to see a longer trend.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
Yes. What consideration has been given to the fact that you mentioned there is a high volatility of the real estate sector, and that's been a sector that BC has relied on heavily in the past as an economic engine?
Well, I think people have heard me say this from my very first budget, that a speculative real estate market is a terrible way to grow an economy. That it doesn't provide stability. It provides instability. And I think we're continuing to see that. So I'm very proud of the work we've been doing to build affordable housing, including purpose-built rental housing, so that people can have a place to live. Housing and childcare continue to be our two critical pieces to be able to make investments in to build a strong economy. I think the pandemic has reminded us of the importance of some of those pieces. Childcare is certainly more front and center than it's been, because people have recognized the importance of childcare in people being able to get back to work, women in particular. Housing, again, if you can't recruit people because housing's too expensive, you're not going to be able to get the people you need here to grow your economy and to build on the investments that are here. So building on those investments that we made in our very first budget and continuing forward with those is going to be front and center for us as government.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC.
Minister, you mentioned the uncertainty of a possible second wave, and how concerned are you that, as soon as this fall, it could affect BC's economic recovery, and just how stable are these projections in light of what could come? How fragile are these numbers if it's so tied to, the fluidity of the pandemic?
Well, I think there's no question that this is a snapshot in time, that this is based on the information that we have today. It's subject to change. There's no question about that. We could see these numbers shift in a whole number of ways. The situation could get better. We could see recovery from a more optimistic point of view be stronger. We could see more challenges. A second wave could hit, as you point out, which could slow down the kind of recovery that we're seeing. So first and foremost has to be health and safety, and that's why I come back to that, because it's key to any kind of economic recovery that we're looking at.
Do you have a follow-up, Tanya?
Yes, please. Thank you. And looking stateside, as we see more and more states reshutter because it's getting so much worse there, and we're seeing Canada and the U.S. diverge more and more so on that front, how much of an impact is what's happening stateside having, not on Canada necessarily, but on BC, and how do you forecast that to continue to have an effect on us?
Well, certainly we are very tied to the U.S. when it comes to our economy, whether we're talking about trade, whether we're talking about exports, etc. And so it does have an impact on our economy. But I think, again, to come back to the health and safety piece, it is such a stark reminder of the importance of the measured approach that we are taking to recovery, the planned approach that we're taking to recovery, the work that businesses, and I want to say a huge thank you and appreciation to the extraordinary work businesses are doing in making sure that they're putting their plans in place. They're working with WorkSafe. They've got the safety measures in place. Those pieces are critical, and I think what we're seeing in the numbers down south of the border is just a very stark reminder for us of that.
We have time for one more question today, and that is from Keith Baldry, Global News.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for this. You're projecting a massive deficit, but given what's going on in people's lives right now, do you think people really care about the size of a government deficit, whether it's provincial or federal?
I believe people care, but I believe they understand. And that's really what I've heard in my discussions with business leaders, with people in the not-for-profit sector, with Indigenous communities, with the public, is that people understand. They care about the deficit. They want you to manage their money well. They want you to look after it and recognize it's not our money, it's the people's money in this province. But they also understand the importance of those investments that are helping them survive right now. I think we've had a reminder during the pandemic about how important it is to have quality services in place, whether we're talking about healthcare or schools. Those are critical to economic recovery. So yes, I do believe people care, but I also believe they understand the need to put those supports and programs in place right now, even if it means a larger deficit.
Do you have a follow-up, Keith?
Yeah, just sort of a follow-up to Vaughn's earlier question. On the capital spending side, you've got a $22 billion plan. Given that infrastructure spending is a traditional form of economic stimulus, can you envision expanding that program potentially over the next few years?
I think we certainly won't rule it out, but we do have a large spend, as I mentioned. It really is a historic spend in British Columbia, the largest capital spend in a fiscal plan. So it will do us well as we do exactly that, as we put infrastructure programs in place, as we're able to get people back to work on those projects. I think we'll be in very good shape. I think it'll do us very well.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.